In this video, we're going to take a look at a shimmering red ink by Diamine Red Lustre. Now, as always, there's timestamps down below so you can skip around, but if you've got the time, it really does help me out for you to check out the entire video. Also, down in the description is a link to the red ink playlist, so if you wanted to see more of them, you can find that there. I'm an ink guy, and let's get into the first writing sample done on 90 GSM Clairfontaine. No bleeding, no ghosting. We have no feather, no spread. There's shading, but the thing is, a lot of times the shading winds up looking different because of this shimmer. Now, the extra fine is lighter than the stub, and the medium's the same tone as the stub. We do get shading spots in the extra fine and in the medium, but again, the shimmer sometimes makes it harder to see. The extra fine took 8 seconds to dry, while the medium took 16. The scrubby for both do show a tiny bit of color variation. We do get light pepperings of dark spots in the writing. And the smear test you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. To have a range of experience with this ink, all of the writing samples are done with a Jinhao 159 with a 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a medium, and a Jinhao X750 with an extra fine. Then a Duke 209 with a Fude nib was inked up, used for a day, and used to take the notes for this video. The next writing sample is done on 52 GSM Tomoe River. No bleeding, but some minor ghosting. We have no feather, no spread. We get shading in the stub, shading in the extra fine, which does look a little darker than the stub, but no shading in the medium, which is the darkest tone on the page. The extra fine took 16 seconds to dry, while the medium took 20. Scrubby for both gave no color variation, but the extra fine did have a few darker spots. And the smear test you could not recover if you smeared while you were writing. I agree with Vita. There's a lot to learn by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. A line of ink is put down, and then it's put into water for 10 to 15 seconds. And what we see is that this pushes up. We get a little bit of an orange on the bottom of it, and then a nice dark red all the way through the top. And the one on the right that's let dry for 10 minutes, it really looks the same, meaning I'm not expecting any kind of resistance from this ink. The next writing sample is done on 80 GSM Rhodia dot pad. No bleeding, no ghosting. We have no feather, no spread. We have no shading in the stub, no shading in the medium. A couple of dark spots show themselves in the extra fine. Now, the extra fine is a tad bit lighter than the stub, and the medium is a tad bit darker than the stub. The extra fine took 11 seconds to dry, while medium took 18. Scrubby for both do show a tiny bit of color variation, but it shows itself only in the extra fine. And the smear test you could recover if you smeared while you were writing. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink could be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it may be to clean from your pen. The smear is allowed to dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, I would not use this in a note-taking situation because that lowercase h has a complete blowout, and I don't want to lose that information. Now, water is starting to reactivate a lot of this ink, but there's quite a bit of it still left on the paper. Pen flush does the same thing that water does, nothing more. The 1/3 bleach solution we see is completely removing it from the paper, but you're not going to need it to get it out of your pen because it only took water for me to clean this from my pen. The next writing sample is done on original Crown Mill paper. No bleeding and no ghosting. We have no feather, no spread. We have light bits of shading that are occurring in the stub, light bits of shading that are occurring in the extra fine, and even some lighter areas that show themselves in the medium. So all three of them are showing little bits of shading. The extra fine and the stub are the same tone, while the medium is much darker on the page. The scrubby for both aren't really showing the color variation, but there's only a little bit in the writing itself. And the smear test, you stand a chance of recovery if you smear while you're writing. For the inks tested, the average viscosity was 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Diamine's Red Lustre has a viscosity of 1.64, making this a wet ink. The next writing sample is done on Apica CD paper. No bleeding, no ghosting. We get no feather, no spread, no shading in the stub, no shading in the extra fine, and none in the medium. It just is lost here on this paper. Now the extra fine and the stub appear to be the same tone, while the medium is darker than both of those. The extra fine took 7 seconds to dry, medium 11. Scrubby for both aren't really showing any color variation. We're not really getting it in the writing. In the smear test, you could probably recover if you smeared while you were writing. For the inks tested, the average dry time was 17 seconds, with a realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Diamine's Red Lustre has an average dry time of 16 seconds, making it normal. The last writing sample is done on Franklin Christoph paper. No bleeding, no ghosting. It only occurred at the scrubby, which never really matters. It's a little more absorbent paper with no feather, no spread. We see shading happening in the stub. We see shading happening in the extra fine, but we see none in the medium. Now, the medium is by far the darkest tone on the page. The extra fine and the stub generally appear to be about the same tone. The extra fine took 6 seconds to dry and the medium took 10. The scrubby for both don't really show color variation, but it does show up in the extra fine and stub writing. The smear test says you could likely recover if you smeared while you were writing. Instead of finding inks that look like Diamine's Red Lustre, I'd prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. I decided to go with a blue ink that matches both the red and the gold shimmer. This blue is from Monteverde. It is Charoite, and I know I'm mispronouncing that. If you'd prefer a different complement color, then down in the description are links to those playlists. So what do I think of Diamine's Red Lustre? The gold shimmer responds well on this red. It can be overpowering in some of the shading spots, making the darker shades more glittery. So what nib and pen are going to give the best writing experience with this ink? As has always been the case with the glittering inks, I suggest a broad wet pen or a super wet pen if you're going to a smaller than broad nib. I hope you got something out of this video, and in the next video, we're going to take a look at KWZ's Gummy Berry.